The sound of chainsaws greeted me before I even pulled into my driveway. At first I thought it had to be coming from a neighbor's yard, someone trimming branches or removing a dead tree. But as I turned onto my street, my heart stopped. Was my yard.
Comment below. Where are you watching from?
A crew of workers dressed in neon vests stood around the massive oak trees that had once towered over my property. Or rather, where they had once stood. Now all that remained was stumps, sawdust, and the lifeless remains of my family's history. I slammed my car into park and practically threw myself out of the driver's seat. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted, running toward the workers. One of them, a man with a clipboard, looked up, surprised. HOA orders, ma'am. We were told to remove these trees." HOA. Karen. A white-hot rage burned in my chest as I took in the destruction. These trees weren't just part of my yard, they were family heirlooms. My grandparents had planted them when they first built this house decades ago. They had survived storms, droughts, and generations of change. And now, they were gone. I turned, on my heel, and marched straight to the HOA office, fury blazing with every step. Karen Middleton, the self-appointed dictator of our HOA, sat behind her oversized desk, scrolling through her phone with a self-satisfied smirk. She barely glanced up as I stormed in. "Oh, hello," she said, feigning surprise. "Something wrong?" I slammed my hands onto her desk. "You cut down my trees." Karen sighed dramatically, setting her phone aside. "They were non-compliant." I blinked, barely able to process her words. Non-compliant? With what? She leaned back in her chair, folding her hands like she was some benevolent queen. Section 14, paragraph 3 of the HOA guidelines states that all front yard landscaping must meet community standards. I narrowed my eyes. "And?" Karen waved a hand. "Those old trees didn't fit the aesthetic we're promoting. The board agreed they had to go." I gritted my teeth, trying to keep my voice steady. "You had no right to do this. Those trees were on my property." Karen just smirked. "We have full authority over landscaping decisions in the neighborhood. It's in the contract you signed when you moved in." I felt my fingers dig into her desk. "I've lived here for 10 years, Karen, and in that time the HOA has never once had a problem with my trees." She shrugged. "Times change. The board voted. The trees are gone. There's nothing you can do about it." I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. Karen thought she had won. She thought she could bully me like she had bullied every other homeowner on this street. But what she didn't know, she had just cut down the wrong person's trees. What Karen failed to realize was that I wasn't just a homeowner. I was a renowned environmental lawyer, and she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. The HOA meeting was already in progress when I threw open the doors. Karen Middleton stood at the front of the room, dressed in one of her signature pastel blazers, clutching a clipboard like it was a royal decree. Around her sat the usual HOA board members, along with a dozen or so homeowners who had probably been forced to sit through another one of her pointless rule changes. When she saw me, her plastic smile flickered, just for a second. But then she quickly recovered, pasting on her usual smug expression. "Ah, welcome," she said, voice dripping with fake politeness. "You're a bit late. We've already moved past the open comments section." I ignored her and strode straight to the front of the room. "You had my heirloom trees cut down without my permission." A hush fell over the room. I could feel the eyes of my neighbors on me, some shifting uncomfortably. HOA meetings were usually a one-sided affair, with Karen steamrolling any opposition. But not today. Karen let out a mock gasp, placing a hand over her chest. "Oh, that," she said with false innocence. "Yes, the board made the decision. Those trees were non-compliant, and we're working hard to maintain a uniform aesthetic in the neighborhood." My fingers curled into fists at my sides. "Those trees were protected under state conservation laws. You had no right to remove them." Karen waved a careless hand. "Now, let's not be dramatic. We followed HOA guidelines." She picked up a thick rulebook, flipping through it like it was the holy grail of suburban dictatorship. "According to Section 14, paragraph 3, the HOA has the right to enforce landscaping regulations as we see fit." She smirked, tapping the book. "It's all right here." I crossed my arms. And where exactly does it say you can remove privately owned trees without homeowner consent? Karen didn't even blink. We interpret the rules as necessary. I let out a slow breath. Let me get this straight. You unilaterally decided that my trees didn't fit the aesthetic and had them destroyed without checking legal protections. Her grin widened, as if she was enjoying my frustration. That's right. The other board members shifted in their seats, a few avoiding my gaze. They were starting to realize this wasn't going to go the way Karen expected. I took a step. Forward, voice steady. Do you have any idea what you've done? Karen let out a dramatic sigh. Oh, please, it's just a few trees. They were ugly anyway. My jaw tightened. She thought this was over. She thought she had won. I stepped closer, lowering my voice just enough for only her to hear. You're going to regret this, Karen snorted. What are you going to do? She let out a mocking laugh. Sue us? A slow, dangerous smile spread across my face. Oh, Karen, I said, shaking my head, you have no idea who you just messed with. Karen thought she had won. She thought I would be just another homeowner who got steamrolled by her phony authority and HOA rulebook. She had no idea that I wasn't just angry. I was prepared, and I was about to turn her world upside down. That night, I sat at my desk with the HOA's official rulebook, flipping through every page like it held the key to Karen's destruction. And just as I suspected, nowhere in the bylaws did it say the HOA had the right to remove privately owned trees. What I did find, however, was something even better. According to Section 5, Paragraph 8, the HOA was required to notify homeowners in writing before making any landscaping modifications that affected private property. Karen had completely ignored this. She had also failed to get a vote from the full board before making a decision that involved structural changes to the neighborhood. Another violation. By the time I closed the book, I had found at least 5 different rule violations. HOA rules were one thing. State laws? A whole different beast. I pulled up my legal database and started researching. In my state, any tree over 50 years old that had cultural or historical significance was protected under the Heritage Tree Conservation Act. Karen had just destroyed multiple trees that fell under that protection. Worse still, the penalties were brutal. Violating this law carried hefty fines, up to $50,000 per tree, plus the cost of mandatory replanting. The best part? These penalties applied not just to the HOA, but to the individual who authorized the destruction, meaning Karen wasn't just in trouble, she was personally liable. Next, I needed proof that Karen had cut legal corners. I drove to the landscaping company that had done the removal, pretending to be a concerned homeowner looking to hire them. Yeah, we worked on a place in your neighborhood last week, the guy at the counter said. Big job, took down a few old oaks. I leaned in casually. Did the HOA give you the proper paperwork? He hesitated. No, actually, he admitted. We asked, but the HOA lady, Karen, I think, said it was a private matter and we didn't need to worry about it. Bingo. I pulled out my phone. Would you be willing to give a statement about that? The guy shrugged. Sure, we don't want to get caught up in legal stuff. And just like that, I had a witness. With my evidence stacked high, it was time to bring in the big guns. I drafted a formal complaint against Karen and the HOA, citing HOA violations, ignoring proper procedures, state environmental law violations, heritage tree destruction, fraudulent HOA practices, failing to get board approval, personal liability against Karen. Then, I sent the report to the State Environmental Agency, the City Planning Department, the County Legal Office. Within 24 hours, Karen and the HOA were going to get the shock of their lives. And the best part, they still had no idea what was coming. Karen's world was about to come crashing down. Exactly 1 week after I filed my complaints, the first official legal notices landed on the HOA's doorstep. By noon, Karen had 3 separate agencies breathing down her neck. The State Environmental Protection Board, investigating the destruction of heritage-protected trees, the City Planning Department, issuing a cease and desist order for any future landscaping changes, the County Legal Office, filing an official lawsuit against the HOA for property damage and environmental violations, And just like that, Karen's smug little empire started to crumble. The next day, the HOA board held an emergency meeting. Karen walked in confident as ever, dressed in her usual pastel blazer and fake pearl necklace. She threw her designer bag onto the table, exhaling dramatically. "All right, everyone," she said, plastering on a forced smile. "We have a minor issue, but I'm handling it." She held up one of the legal notices like it was nothing more than junk mail. But this time, the board members weren't buying it. "This isn't a minor issue, Karen," said Mr. Hendricks, one of the senior board members. He was gripping his own legal notice, his face pale. "Do you understand how serious this is? The county is suing us for property damage." Karen rolled her eyes. "It's just a scare tactic. I've already spoken to a lawyer and he says we can fight it." "A lawyer?" Mrs. Thompson, another board member, scoffed. "Who? Some guy you found online?" Karen's smile tightened. "He's experienced." "Karen, we read the lawsuit," Mr. Hendricks snapped. "They're hitting us with environmental destruction, violations of state law, and property damage. That's not something a cheap lawyer can just make disappear." "Exactly," Mrs. Thompson chimed in. "And guess what? The fines don't just apply to the HOA as an entity. They apply to the person who authorized the tree removal." All eyes turned to Karen. She froze. For the first time, I saw it. The panic creeping into her perfectly sculpted expression. No, she said quickly. "That's not how this works. The HOA is responsible as a group, not me personally." "That's not what the lawsuit says," Mr. Hendricks interrupted. "It names you specifically." Karen's face went ghost white. We can just settle," she stammered. "Pay a fine or something." But the board members were done with her. "You told us this was legal," one member muttered. "You said we wouldn't get in trouble," another added. "We trusted you," Mrs. Thompson snapped. "And now we could be personally sued." Karen opened her mouth to argue, but this time no one was listening. She had spent years bullying this community. Now no one was willing to go down with her. And the best part? She still had no idea that the person suing her was a renowned environmental lawyer. Karen walked into the courtroom with her usual confidence, wearing an overpriced blazer and a fake air of authority. But I could see it, the slight twitch in her jaw, the way she clutched her cheap briefcase a little too tightly. She was nervous. She should be. The moment she spotted me at the plaintiff's table, her smug expression wavered. I watched realization dawn in her eyes as she put the pieces together. I wasn't just some angry homeowner. I was a renowned environmental lawyer, and she was about to get obliterated. Her lawyer, a cheap second-rate attorney, stood up first, attempting to argue that the HOA had the authority to remove my trees. "Your Honor," he began, clearing his throat, "the HOA bylaws state that all landscaping must meet community standards. My client was simply enforcing these rules." I stood. "Objection." The judge, an older man who had likely heard every excuse in the book, turned to me. "On what grounds?" I flipped open a printed copy of the HOA bylaws and held it up. "For the court. Nowhere in this document does it give the HOA the authority to remove privately owned trees without homeowner consent." I turned a page and pointed. "In fact, Section 5, Paragraph 8 specifically states that any major landscaping modifications require written notice and homeowner approval." The judge raised an eyebrow, looking at Karen's lawyer. "Is this true?" The attorney fumbled with his papers. Karen shot him a glare. The judge sighed. "Strike one." I wasn't done. "Furthermore," I continued, pulling out a thick legal document, "the trees in question were over 50 years old and protected under the Heritage Tree Conservation Act." I handed copies to the judge and the defense. "These laws clearly state that removing such trees without proper approval results in severe legal consequences, including fines of up to $50,000 per tree, a law the defendant knowingly violated." Karen's lawyer turned pale. Karen, meanwhile, looked like she wanted to sink into her chair and disappear. The judge slowly adjusted his glasses and peered at her. "Miss Middleton, were you aware of these protections?" Karen stammered, "But—" Her voice cracked. I thought the HOA had the right to make decisions for the community." I tilted my head. "So you didn't consult any legal professionals before removing the trees?" Silence. The judge exhaled, clearly done with her nonsense. Your Honor, Karen finally said, attempting to regain control, this was all a misunderstanding. I was only doing what I thought was best for the neighborhood. The judge held up a hand, silencing her. A misunderstanding? He let out a dry chuckle. Ms. Middleton, your actions resulted in tens of thousands of dollars in damages, multiple legal violations, and unnecessary destruction of protected property. That's not a misunderstanding. That's negligence, Karen gulped. The judge turned to me. I've heard enough. The court finds the HOA and Ms. Middleton fully liable for damages, and they will be required to pay a fine of $100,000 for environmental violations, reimburse the plaintiff for property damage, replant every tree that was removed, at their expense. Karen let out a strangled gasp. As for Ms. Middleton personally, the judge continued, her actions have made it clear that she is unfit to serve in a position of leadership. Effective immediately, she is to resign as HOA president. A ripple of whispers spread through the courtroom. Karen opened her mouth to protest, but no words came out. She had lost. Karen left the courtroom a different person than when she entered. Gone was the smug arrogance, the fake confidence, the self-important attitude. In its place was a pale, shaken woman who had just watched her entire house of cards collapse in front of her. And the best part? This was just the beginning of her downfall. Within a week of the verdict, the HOA was officially served with its massive fine, a staggering $100,000 in environmental penalties. But that wasn't all. They were also ordered to reimburse me for the damage to my property, cover the cost of replanting every tree they destroyed, undergo a full financial audit, because if Karen had been this reckless with power, what else had she been hiding? The HOA board, once loyal to Karen, started panicking. We can't afford this, one board member hissed during an emergency HOA meeting. This is all Karen's fault. Another snapped. I just sat back, arms crossed, watching them all turn on each other like rats on a sinking ship. Karen tried to quietly resign, thinking she could slink away and avoid the worst of the backlash, but I wasn't done with her yet. Filed a personal lawsuit against her for intentional property damage, ensuring that she, not just the HOA, was held fully accountable. The court ruled in my favor again. Now, in addition to losing her position, Karen was forced to pay out of her own pocket to replace the heirloom trees, banned from holding any HOA leadership position in the future, publicly exposed, her name appearing in legal reports and local news. Karen's final humiliation, replanting the trees. But the best part? The judge didn't just fine her, he ordered her to personally oversee the replanting of my heirloom trees, which meant Karen, the woman who thought she could destroy my property without consequences, now had to work with landscapers to ensure the correct species were replanted, pay for them out of her own bank account, watch as my family's legacy was restored by her own hands. The day the landscapers arrived, Karen refused to look me in the eye. She stood there, stiff and uncomfortable, forced to watch as the first sapling was planted in the soil where my beloved oak tree had once stood. I leaned in with a satisfied smirk. Beautiful, isn't it? Karen didn't answer, but the tightness in her jaw and the humiliated flush on her face told me everything I needed to know. With Karen officially dethroned, the HOA was forced to restructure. The corrupt board members resigned, and a new leadership team was elected, one that actually cared about the homeowners, not just power. The neighborhood finally felt like a community again. At the next HOA meeting, people actually smiled and talked about real improvements instead of obsessing over pointless rules. Karen, she put her house up for sale and moved away in disgrace. No one in the neighborhood missed her, and me. I stood in my yard, watching as my newly planted trees swayed in the breeze, knowing that justice had been served. Karen was gone, her house sold, within weeks, and the sight of a moving truck in her driveway was the final nail in her coffin. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't try to explain herself. She simply disappeared, fleeing from the very neighborhood she had once ruled like a dictator. No one threw her a farewell party. No one even cared. With Karen out of the picture, the HOA underwent a complete transformation. At the next community meeting, a new board was elected, one that actually listened to the homeowners instead of controlling them. No more unfair fines, no more ridiculous rules, no more abuse of power. For the first time in years, people actually felt free in their own neighborhood. Homeowners who had once lived in fear of HOA retaliation now openly shared their concerns. Landscaping decisions were voted on, not dictated. People even started socializing again, enjoying the sense of community that Karen had spent years destroying. The neighborhood had won. As for me, my battle was finally over. The new heirloom trees were planted, their young branches swaying gently in the breeze. It would take years before they grew to their former grandeur, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that they were back. What mattered was that my family's legacy had been restored. I stood beneath one of the saplings, running my fingers over its delicate leaves, and for the first time since this entire nightmare began, I felt peace. One afternoon, my neighbors gathered in my yard for a small celebration. People brought food, drinks, and laughter, sharing stories about Karen's downfall like it was a legendary battle they had all survived together. "Best thing to happen to this neighborhood," someone said, raising a glass. "You're a hero," another neighbor added. I just smiled. I did what anyone would do. Mrs. Thompson, the former HOA member who had turned against Karen, shook her head. "No, you did what none of us had the courage to do." That night, as the sun set behind my newly planted trees, I stood there, soaking in the victory. Karen thought she could control everything. She thought she could bully people into submission. But in the end, she lost everything, and I had won, because no one, not Karen, not the HOA, not anyone, would ever mess with me again. Justice had been served.